Hello everyone and welcome back to the FPL Family YouTube channel. I'm Sam and today we are going to be taking a look at the most popular picks in the game so far. Now, as a word of warning, last season the most popular pick going into game week 1 was Chelsea's Timo Werner, and of course we all know how that ended up. So picking the most popular picks isn't always the best thing to do. However, there are a number of players that are going to come up in this video who it is definitely advisable that you look to have in your 15 for the opening game week of the season, and probably keep in your team for the full 38 game weeks. There are a number of players in there which you are just going to want to keep and love and look after for the entire year, and they are popular for a reason. Now, of course, this video and the percentages of people that own these players will change over the course of pre-season as new players are added to the game and as more players, FPL managers, sign up and set up their own teams. That will have an impact on the percentage ownership stats. But for now, these are the top 15 picks in FPL right now. So starting up the top there with Salah, who is the most highly owned player right now, with 49.7% of the game owning him, down to a footballing legend and an FPL legend of old, somebody that I have weirdly shared a lift with up in Liverpool when Lee and I went to watch Liverpool play Watford a couple of seasons ago, who is owned by 24.4% of the game in Ben Foster. So there is a large difference between the player that's owned by nearly half the game and a player that's owned by nearly a quarter of the game. But these are the top 15 owned players in the game. And looking at that list, you can really understand why. There are a lot of players in there that were very, very good FPL assets during the 2021 season. But not only just during the 2021 season, but also in seasons gone by. There's a lot of pedigree picks in here. And there is a lot of picks in here that are not necessarily the differentials that we'll be looking for. So there is definitely a balance to be had between owning as many of these guys as possible, but also owning as many differentials as possible and players that you've kind of done the research on and you think are going to have a good start to the season. Now this year we are reviving the Jammy Pick, and there are going to be Jammy Pick videos every week for each game week in turn. For those of you that haven't been members of the FPL family for very long, my Jammy Picks are players that I just kind of pick out week by week, ones that you're not necessarily going to want to keep for the whole season, but that you're bringing in for a specific period of time. They've got to be differentials, they've got to be owned by under 5%, but the majority of them are owned by under 1% of the game. So if it comes off, it's going to massively be a bonus. Thinking back to a couple of seasons ago when Snodgrass was an absolute legend for me. And I had Firmino that game when he also got 3 assists. So the Jammy Picks are coming back, but you need a balance in your side between Jammy Picks and also these heavily owned big investment players, because the majority of these are also going to cost you a lot of money too. So let's start at the top then with Mo Salah. As I say, owned by 49% of the game. He was last season just unbelievable yet again, and this season we did have some slight concerns about him and maybe going to the Olympics with Egypt, but it's been confirmed that he's not going to do that this summer and therefore will be available for Liverpool for game week 1. Last season out, he got 231 FPL points, which was the third most across the entire game. He scored 22 goals, which was top for midfielders, and registered 6 assists also. He had 33 big chances, scored 6 penalties, got 21 bonus points, was best XG for midfielders in the game, and was also top for shots with 126. All of those things explain exactly why Mo Salah is the most highly owned player in the game. Couple that with the Liverpool fixtures, which you can see on screen at the moment, and you can really tell why Salah is so popular. That run of fixtures to start the season, with the exception of maybe that Chelsea game in game week 3, suggests that there's FPL points all over it for Mo Salah in the early part of the season. And as I said a couple of times before and in the premium video, I think he'll be highly triple captained, maybe in game week 1. But also there's potential for it in game week 6, maybe game week 5, depending upon how the new Palace manager Vieira gets on settling into the club there. So you can really see why Mohamed Salah is so popular in the game. Following on from him was a little bit of a surprise. I was expecting Bruno to be the most heavily owned of the Manchester United players, but it's actually Luke Shaw who finds himself there. And in part, I think that's to do with his heroics for England in the Euros this summer. Obviously scored England's goal in the final, had a phenomenal tournament, and was just kind of carrying on from what we saw from him in the Premier League season last year. This time around, he's owned currently by 42% of the game, 42.3% of the game. So he is a really popular option. I think when we have a little look at his underlying stats, we can understand why. He took 97 corners for Manchester United last season. 29 of those were successful. He had 66 penalty area touches, which was the 6th best for defenders. We have to remember that we are talking about a defender here with 66 penalty area touches. That's the same as like St Max had for Newcastle, and he's registered as a forward in the game this season. Kept 13 clean sheets. United kept 13 clean sheets. He was on the field for 10 of those, which was the 4th best in the league. He only conceded 44 goals this season, which was the 5th best in the league. Honestly, I think with Luke Shaw, he is one of those players that is going to be really popular. But if you want to go for a less popular option, if you want to go for a less obvious choice than Luke Shaw, then have a little look at Harry Maguire, have a little look at Wan-Bissaka. Both of them have just as good underlying stats as Luke Shaw. Of course, Harry Maguire also has had just as long on international duty as Luke Shaw had for England. But Wan-Bissaka has had a little bit less, so a bit more training time with the club. We're yet to see how they bed back into Manchester United and whether they go straight into game week 1, straight back into pre-season, or whether Ole Gunnar Solskjaer allows them some extra time off. So that's just something to keep an eye on. Luke's completely followed by Bruno Fernandes in 3rd as the most heavily owned player in the game. 40.6% of the game currently owning Bruno Fernandes. He was the highest FPL point scorer of last season with 244 FPL points to his name. So no surprise to see him sitting pretty up there in 3rd spot. 18 goals, the 3rd best across the league last season. 14 assists, which was tied 1st. For assists last season. So again, really popular, really good underlying stats for Bruno Fernandes. 36 bonus points last season, which was the 2nd best across the division. 121 attempts on goal, 2nd best for midfielders, only beaten of course by Salah, who we've mentioned already. He had 20 big chances, he was 3rd for shots, and top for chances created with 95. Of course, we have the additional bonuses of penalties with Bruno Fernandes, so it's not surprising to see him up there. And of course, I think at 12 million, he'll look to be a bit of a popular option because most of us FPL managers were expecting him to come in at the same price as Salah, probably 12.5 million. So the fact we're saving 0.5 on Bruno feels like a real bonus. In 4th then we have Martinez, the Aston Villa goalkeeper, who was absolutely legendary for FPL managers last season. He kept 15 clean sheets, which was the 3rd best in the league. Only conceded 46 goals, which was tied 7th for the least across the division. He was one of only 4 players to play every single minute of Premier League football for his club last season. And of course, he also made 143 saves, which was only beaten by now relegated Johnston and Ramsdale. So Martinez looking really good. However, that price tag does put me off, and I do think that there are better options if you look at the 4.5 category, especially if you're looking for rotating goalkeeper options. Following on from him then, of course, we have his teammate Jack Grealish, who spent a lot of the season last year out through injury, only managing to play 26 games for the club last season. He was top for assists though for Villa with 12, and obviously managed 6 goals as well last season. He had 168 penalty area touches for Villa last time out, which was the 5th best for midfielders. And when you look at the 5 that were above him, he played at least 100 minutes less football than they did. We don't know where Jack Grealish is going to be playing his football next season. Of course, Manchester City they're involved in kind of trying to sign him for about £100 million, which is phenomenal money for Grealish when you think that Spurs offered 25 million for him a couple of seasons back. He had a great campaign with the Euros, didn't play as many minutes though as some of the others, and that might bode well for him going into pre-season and into the 21-22 season, because of course he is still recovering, or has not long recovered rather, from that injury. Premier League new boy Tony is up there following Grealish His underlying stats I had to look up a bit more closely because, of course, he was in the Championship last season. He played 41 games for Brentford in the Championship last season, scoring 33 goals. That was the most across the Championship. In fact, when you look at the next players down in the Championship, it was only Blackburn's Armstrong that was next with 28, so 5 goals less than Tony managed last season. He also got 10 assists. His had 146 shots, 60 of those were on target. He had an XG of 28.69. Everything you look at with Tony looks like it's going to be promising. Of course, it is a very, very different ball game playing in the Premier League to playing in the Championship. So we'll have to see how Brentford come up. But at 6.5 million, he is one that I will be surprised if he doesn't have near on 50% of owners by the time the season starts. I think he will be incredibly popular at his price point. Ollie Watkins, similar to what I've just said about Tony, great season last year in his opening campaign for Aston Villa, and I think that will only improve this season with the addition of Emi Buendia to that Aston Villa squad. And of course, if Grealish stays there as well, that will really help out Watkins. 15 goals last season, the fifth best amongst forward, 9 assists, the third best amongst forwards. Played more minutes than any other forward across the Premier League last season. 97 goal attempts for him. That's the third best again across the Premier League. I was really impressed with Ollie Watkins last season. He was a bit of a frustration at his price point at times because you happily benched him and then he went on to get goals in games that you weren't expecting him to. That's a lesson I'm going to learn for this season. And with his little price jump to 7.5 million, he will be one that I think is just in my starting 11 from the get-go for next year. Calvert-Lewin follows him. Then in terms of ownership in the game, he is owned at the moment by 28.4% of the game. He is top, or was top last season for headed goals across the Premier League. Managed 16 goals and 6 assists across the division last year. He also had the most glorious start to the 2021 season. And if that's something he can replicate this year, then he might be one to get on early doors. I think it will be interesting to see what happens with him because obviously we've got a new manager coming in and he's yet to join up with Benitez because he's been away on international duty with England at the Euros. But his 83 attempts on goal last season would suggest that that's something that he will continue into the 21-22 season. He also managed 31 big chances, which was the second most across forwards in the game. So all the underlying stats for Calvert-Lewin look promising, and at 8 million, I think he'll be a popular pick. Harry Kane comes next. Now, I'm surprised to see him quite as low down as he is, but I think that's mostly because people are trying to figure out how they get all these expensive premium picks into their teams. Now, when we have a little look at Kane and his fixtures, if he remains a Spurs player next season, the fixtures are a little bit mixed to say the least. Obviously Manchester City to start the season, followed by Wolves, Nuno facing his old side, then Watford, Palace, Chelsea and Arsenal in those 2 London derbies in 5 and 6 look difficult. And that's why I think Kane's ownership is slightly lower than I was anticipating it being at this part of the season, because those fixtures suggest that there might be some other premium picks that potentially offer better value for money. And when we looked, of course, a minute ago at Calvert-Lewin and Watkins, their underlying stats look good and the fixtures don't look too bad for them either. So there is potentially FPL managers thinking about maybe delaying bringing in Kane to after those 2 London derbies. And of course, this all depends on whether he remains a Spurs player next season. When we have a little look at his underlying stats, though, he should be owned by more players than he currently is. He was top for goals last season with 23. He was top for assists last season with 14. He was top for attempts last season in terms of forwards with 137. He was top for shots on target amongst forwards with 51. He was top for bonus points across the whole league last season with 40. He was top for XG and XGI amongst forwards last season. He had 30 big chances last season and he was second for FPL points scored last season with 242, only beaten by Bruno Fernandes, and even then it was only by those 2 FPL points. So Kane's underlying stats suggesting that he should definitely be in our FPL thoughts, and if anything should probably be owned by more FPL managers than he currently is. Following on from him, we've got Liverpool's most expensive defender in Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, I had a little look at the stats between Trent and Robertson to see whether there was any value to be had by having Robertson instead of Trent, because as you'll see, Robertson doesn't appear in this list of most heavily owned players in the game currently. Trent got 8 assists last season. That was 1 less than Robertson, but he did get 2 goals, 1 more than Robertson. So they kind of levelled themselves out there. 10 clean sheets last season for Trent because he wasn't on the pitch for all of the Liverpool clean sheets because, of course, he did miss some matches through injury last season. He was 3rd for set-piece attempts among defenders. He took 106 corners last season. 27 of those were successful. And when you compare that to Robertson, he took more, with 119, but he had less successful ones with just the 19. So the underlying stats between Trent and Robbo for this season are very, very similar, but we do have to be a little bit wary with Trent. Obviously, keep an eye on what Klopp is saying because he didn't go on international duty, having got injured in the friendly before the Euros. So let's see if he's fit and available for game week 1. But I do think Robertson could, if you need 0.5, offer you some decent value for money because the underlying stats actually aren't that different. In my view anyway, if you ask Lee, he thinks Trent is 100% worth that additional 0.5 over Robertson. One of the players that I was expecting to be really high up this list when I had a look was Sanchez at Brighton. He's still there, of course, and looks to be, in my view, the best goalkeeping option for this season, especially now that we've seen Matt Ryan leave Brighton and go to Real Sociedad, because suddenly we now have guarantees that Sanchez is their first choice. Plus, if we want to double him up with Steele as their spare goalkeeper, then we can spend just 8.5 million on 2 goalkeepers and be guaranteed to have a starter every single week. And the Brighton fixtures to start the season are lovely. They are top of the fixture ticker when you look at the defensive stats for the season. And for the first 5 game weeks especially, Brighton looking like a no-brainer in terms of investment. 10 clean sheets last season in 27 games for Sanchez. He made 66 saves in that period. He was the 4th best goalkeeper for pass completion and only one of 9 first choice defenders to create a chance for his side. I think at 4.5 million, Sanchez should be more highly owned than he is, and I suspect this number will rise over the course of the season as people start to realise that Matt Ryan is no longer a threat to Sanchez's place. Leicester's Fofana is up there in with the top percentage picks for this season so far. I'm not surprised either. At his price point, 4.5 million, he looks to be a really lovely pick. When we have a little look at him and his underlying stats from last season, he was top for aerial duels from Leicester last time out, with 148 of them. There was also 11 clean sheets at Leicester last season, and he was the best Leicester defender for clearances, blocks and interceptions, that CBI stat, which I really like the look of. He was also the 5th best defender in the game for interceptions last season. 4.5 million, nice rotating cheap option in defence, but actually I think you'll play Fofana more often than you would bench him. From one extreme to the other in terms of defenders, Fofana up to Diaz. You're going to pay a lot more money for Diaz at 6 million, but my goodness, is he worth the 6 million? The only thing that slightly puts me off is the Manchester City fixtures, which I don't think look that ideal in terms of clean sheet potential. They do look good going forward though. Diaz got 1 goal and 1 assist last season, 14 goal attempts, 6 of those on target, which isn't bad for a defender. He also kept 17 clean sheets, which was the most in the Premier League last season. And conceded just 21 goals when he was on the pitch. So again, shows all you need to know about how good a defender Ruben Diaz is. When we have a little look at his starts, he got 32 of them, which was the most across that Manchester City defence if you leave out Ederson. So in terms of security of starts, as well as just being a really good defender, Ruben Diaz is your man, and I think his ownership will grow, particularly after that game week 1 fixture against Spurs. Rafinha comes in next then. Last season, he managed 6 goals and 10 assists from 64 chances created. He had 12 big chances created of those 64, 9 clean sheet points for him last season, 67 attempts, which was the most for Leeds midfielders, and 133 penalty area touches. Again, he's getting in all the right positions, and he put in 165 crosses last season. So in terms of FPL points, he was definitely Leeds' most creative player last season. And if they'd have finished the number of chances he created, his FPL points would have been through the roof, particularly when we have a look at assists. And finally, I'm not spending much time on this one because I think he's only there for value purposes. Ben Foster coming in at 4 million. He isn't currently Watford's first choice goalkeeper. He is their spare, but he could offer you some value for money. Although I think if you're going to go Sanchez, looking at Steele is the best bet because, of course, then you're guaranteed a starter every time. But we always have a really cheap, non-starting goalkeeper that's up there in the high percentages as people try to squeeze in as many premiums as they can. So that is it. They are the top 15 most heavily owned players in the game at the moment. Drop me a note in the comments below to let me know how many of them you have in your FPL teams and how many of them you are hoping to have by the time game week 1's deadline rolls around on the 13th of August. If you haven't done so already, remember to hit that subscribe button and drop me a like before you go. Thanks, guys.